I figured I would make an informational video on how to start up and set up a mealworm or superworm colony, just the basic care, go over how I do things, show you my bins. There's some things that I do that not many people do that others may find helpful. So for starters, you're going to want to pick out some kind of container or some cage. These are my containers here, and they are just large rectangular cages. They're pretty big compared to my hand. But they're just long. They're fairly wide, not very high. That's perfect. You definitely want a container that gives you more ground space than it does height. So something more long and more wide than it is high. However, you definitely want a little bit of height. Because you don't want, especially in the case of superworms, you don't want the worms or the beetles to be able to reach the actual top of your cage. Because I had an accident with my superworms actually, where in my old container that was smaller and shorter, they actually chewed a hole through the top of the screening in the lid, and I found them 2 weeks later still crawling around the room where I keep these bins. So you want a little bit of height, but remember that the floor space for mealworms and superworm colonies is preferable. So you can use a container, like I did, punch in some air holes. Make sure you punch your holes from the outside of the inside of the container outwards towards you, so that any sharp edges that are created are facing you and not the worms or the beetles, where it could potentially kill them and just wreak havoc on you keeping a breeding sustainable colony. You can put mesh, put screening in the top, which is what I did. This is plastic screening or plastic canvas, which is found with the yard and sewing crafts at any craft store. And it is just glued over top of a cut hole in the lid. I glued it on the underside of the lid using hot glue. And I glued it around the entire perimeter so that there's absolutely no gaps or holes along this edge of it. Makes it really, really sturdy. And by the way, for those who don't know, hot glue is just melted plastic, so it is perfectly safe to use in your pet invertebrates and reptile cages as well, for like fix-ups, and if a decor item or something breaks, glue it back together with hot glue instead of throwing it out. So that's your basic for a container. A lot of people like to use the plastic sliding drawer like towers for their colonies, which is good, especially if you need more worms or more beetles and you need a fairly large amount, or you want to breed them to sell. In my case, I don't have room for that. I didn't want to spend anywhere from $20 to $60 for a plastic drawer tower either. So I just got these containers at the dollar store, and then the mesh, I got one sheet which did both containers for $1. And this is actually a pretty good sized container, and this will actually be good for a pretty good sized colony. So I really like these bins, but it's up to you, whatever you need. If you don't need anything huge, you just need to worms or beetles to supply your personal pets, you're not interested in selling them, you don't want to get overrun, you're worried about getting overrun, stick to something small, just one container per species. You can also, if you want, a lot of people do 2 separate containers, or they'll do 2-3 drawers if they're doing the drawer system, and they'll actually pick out all the beetles, which are the adults, and move them to a different, completely different container. That way the babies and the eggs in the oatmeal at that time can hatch and grow completely free of any possibility of getting eaten by larger worms or the adults themselves. In order to prevent larger worms or adults from eating the eggs or the little babies, you gotta make sure that you keep a constant supply of water. And since mealworms and superworms come from a desert environment, you don't want humidity and you don't want anything wet touching your substrate at all, because that can cause grain mites. So we just put in vegetables I use carrots, just baby carrots in a bag. And I just dab off any condensation on them using a paper towel and throw them in there, and I swap them out and change them every other day. When you are doing this swap out, replacing the old carrots with fresh ones, also pick out any kind of any dead worms. Dead worms will appear black or hard and crispy and obviously not moving. You can see though I have all these worms on the top that aren't really moving much. But if I start bugging them, like if I squeeze their tail, they'll move. So they're obviously alive. But worms that aren't moving like this, it's not necessarily it's not really a health concern. Usually this just means that they are getting ready to pupate. So they're becoming dormant. They're going into almost a hibernation state. They will also go into hibernation state if they're kept too cold, such as in the refrigerator, as they do at the pet store. And by keeping them cold in the refrigerator, you're actually preventing them from pupating, which is how you end up getting the adult beetles that breed. So if they're not moving, don't freak out. Also, mealworms and superworms, they are nocturnal. So with the light on next to them here, they don't really want to move much. They don't want to draw any kind of attention to themselves through movement. So they're holding really still. But if you come in after dark with just a little flashlight, you'll probably see them crawling around pretty good. You'll see the stuff in the bottom. This here is my substrate. It's the growing medium. This is their main food source. I use oatmeal. A lot of people like to use wheat bran. You can also ground up your oatmeal if you want for something finer. If you want, you could experiment by adding like a dry cricket gut loading food, or like adding in some vitamin powder or something like that. Though this is not a substitute for dusting the mealworms with a vitamin supplement or calcium supplement before you feed them to your pets. When you put in your substrate, don't make it too deep. Mine is only about the depth of my thumbnail. It's only about half an inch to an inch of your oatmeal or whatever it is you decide to use in there is all you need. More is actually worse, because if you have a really thick layer of oatmeal, it actually can trap moisture and humidity on the bottom of your container, which can then cause grain mites to erupt. If you want more info on grain mites and how to prevent them, I'll provide you a link in the comments to my video about that. You will see in my tank here that I have some pieces of like cardboard and random stuff thrown in here. This here is like the egg holder portion of an egg crate. And then this here is just a toilet paper roll that I cut in half. And you want something like that in there. You can make it from any piece of cardboard or whatever that you normally would have thrown away. You can use the whole toilet paper roll. You don't have to cut it. You can use, just a flat strip off of an oatmeal box if you want. You can crumple up some newspaper and put that in there. But you want to put that in there for the beetles to hide under. And it's basically going to be a place for the beetles to meet up to help them find each other quicker to breed. And the faster they find each other, the quicker you have babies. Yay! So you do want that. With a note with the superworms, make sure you don't put anything particularly tall in there that they can climb up on and then stand up and be able to reach the screen top. Because superworms, as I mentioned, they will chew through plastic screening. They have been known to chew through thin metal screening either. So just really flat stuff for superworms is fine. You can see here how the mealworms actually even chewed some holes through this egg crate. So they got a pretty strong ability to chew through things. So do be careful of that. Now that we have the basic setup here, there are some differences. There's two big differences between breeding and maintaining mealworms versus breeding and maintaining superworms. First is mealworms. You just keep them at room temperature. Just give them oatmeal to eat, something for beetles to hide on, and some kind of, place for them to get water, you know, some kind of moisture source, you know, vegetables in there, and they will just grow and eat and grow some more, get nice big and fat, and then when they reach a certain size, they will just automatically curl up, turn into pupa, and then, you know, the full-grown adult beetle emerges from that pupa. Superworms, on the other hand, will not pupate if they see, feel, or sense another superworm or beetle around them. They are too afraid of being eaten by their brothers and sisters and their tank mates while they are pupating or, you know, coming out of that pupa, because these worms are very, very vulnerable. They're very soft-bodied when they're starting to pupate, and then the beetles, when they first emerge, are very, very, very soft. It takes some time for them to get that nice black hard exoskeleton. So for superworms, you must take and separate out each individual worm into its own container and make sure they can't see each other. So I like to use these. These are little sauce containers for keeping like salad dressing on the side in your lunches. I just poke some holes through here, and then when you line them up, wherever you're going to put them, which needs to be a dark place, by the way, you must put these individually cupped or separated superworms into a dark, quiet place, and do not disturb them. They need that to be in the dark in order to pupate. So a lot of people use a shoebox, or I actually put mine in a drawer. But you can line these up, and then you can just stick index cards on all sides in between the cups so that they can't see the superworm can't see the superworm in the cup next to it, or in the cup above it, or whatever. So that's very important. Another important factor is you do not give them food or water. The lack of food or water helps stress the worm into pupating. Like I said, I keep mine in a drawer in these cups with holes punched in them. And I check my worms. I just very quietly, you know, open the drawer just a crack and sneak my head in there and look for pupa once a week. After 2 weeks, if there's a worm in a cup that has still not pupated, when some of the other worms have pupated, remove that worm. That means by then that worm is probably not big enough to turn into a pupa yet. So take that worm out and stick it back in the colony box, let it eat and drink and fatten up some more before you try to get it to pupate again. Once you see your superworms curled up in an E or in a C, or, you know, curled up like in a circle, you know, curled up making an O or an E or a C kind of shape, that means that's actually the position that they go to when they're ready to pupate. So if they're like that, but they're not a pupa yet, it's okay. Just leave them alone. So, but if you have a worm that's just, you know, it's walking around and it's been doing that for the past 2 weeks, and some of your others have pupated or gone into that C shape or whatever, remove that worm. It's not big enough. It's not going to pupate, and leaving it separated from food like that, you're just going to kill it. So at that point, put it back in the container. As I said, mealworms are very easy. They do the whole life cycle on their own. You just need to give them the food and the vegetables and the hiding place. So you really don't have to do anything. They're really easy. Most people use mealworms just simply because of that. They'll go through the life cycle without any extra effort or anything on your part. There's a few downsides to them, though. They're not very big. I have 2 sizes. I have the regular mealworm here and the giant mealworm. But if you have a pet that's pretty big, even some giant mealworms may not be big enough, so you might have to go to superworms. Also, it would be cheaper to feed your large animal a few superworms versus a whole bunch of these giant mealworms. Superworms, though, however, as I mentioned, they do have a stronger jaw. I will not pick them up and handle them by hand, actually, because they can deliver a pretty uncomfortable bite. These guys is just a mild nibble, whatever. So because of that really strong bite, the superworms have a greater chance of causing harm to your pet. So with the large adult superworms, I know this sounds disgusting and gross and inhumane, but I keep a plastic knife nearby and I cut off the heads of the large superworms before I feed them to my pets. And that's because when they're wriggling around and struggling to get away, they could very easily latch on to your animal's skin and, draw blood, or heaven forbid, they actually wriggle in that they grab onto their eye and actually nibble through the eye lens and, make your animal go blind. So it's disgusting, it's inhumane, but it's very important to the health of your pet. Younger, like small superworms and whatnot, I just put them in a bowl. I don't cut their heads off or anything. I just put them live in a bowl and let them sit in a cage. I do that with the mealworms too. I just put them live in a smooth-sided bowl. Again, like a cup, something like this. Just stick them in there. They can't get out. They crawl around, everything. Put them in the cage. My lizard comes over, sticks her head in the bowl, and just gobbles them up. Do not let any feeder pet roam around free and unattended in your pet's cage for an extended period of time. You hear this a lot with crickets. However, superworms, even mealworms, even just one left unattended or just set loose in the cage can end up crawling underneath a piece of decor where your animal doesn't know it is. And then when your animal goes to sleep, it could end up, again, causing a serious wound or nibbling on its tail or making it go blind. So I prefer to feed all of my live prey off of the end of feeder tongs or out of a smooth-sided bowl. That way they can't crawl around and harm my animal. One last note with these guys, something which is where I do something different, is when you're just starting out and you're trying to get your colony going and get babies and get eggs, you need adults, you need lots of adults, and you want them real fast to get them breeding and laying eggs that are hatching into babies, and then you want those babies to grow really quick. So, as I mentioned, the beetles, when they first come out of that pupae, they're very soft-bodied. They're very squishy. So they're easily preyed upon by the worms and other beetles. And this is a really big issue if you don't put enough vegetables or enough often fresh vegetables in there for their water source. They'll also eat the eggs and the young as well. They'll also eat pupa in this case. So in order to protect the pupa and the soft beetles, I pick up the pupa, like this, that are on the surface. I actually pick them out, and I grab only the ones that are on the surface. I may dig a little bit, but I don't dig in the oatmeal too much because I don't want to disturb any breeding beetles. But I pick them out off the surface, and then I put them over here in their own separate container. This here is just a Crickets to Go container from PetSmart. They don't have these anymore, but they used to. I think Petco still uses something similar to this. The entire side is perforated with air holes. And then I just have a piece of paper towel in there for the beetles to climb on to help give them some grip. But this is all pupa, folks. This is all pupa. That's all pupa. And 90% of this is all just from the mealworms. You can see there's a few beetles here already. This one here, hope you can see him, that's very bright white color, bright ivory with the bright orange there on its head. There's another one. That's a freshly emerged beetle. They are extremely soft, extremely vulnerable. They have no hardness at all in their exoskeleton, and they may even be clumsy at walking or climbing at this point. This one here that's a little bit darker, you can see crawling, the one that's brown, his exoskeleton is hardened up pretty good. And then I have one there, I have one over here, but I leave them in this container until their exoskeleton has turned entirely black or a very, very dark chocolate brown, which signifies that their exoskeleton is fully hardened up and they'll be able to, they won't be such easy prey for worms or other beetles to munch on if I accidentally forget to change their carrots when I should. So it's this helps survival. I have a 98% survival rate doing this. I actually so far have 100%. survival rate. I haven't lost any pupa or any beetles doing this. So this will allow all my beetles to get a really good off start before they're in with the worms. So they should be all tip-top shape and breeding the moment they go back into the bin over here. I do keep pieces of carrots or cricket cubes in here for them to get some water when they come out. They don't really bug with it too much because they're still getting used to the whole locomotion thing. You will see there's some in here that are really, really big. Like these two here, this one here, and this one are really huge. Those are actually superworm pupae that I've found in my drawer in these cups from separating them out for a week. You will also see that, it's really hard, but some of these here, you'll notice their legs are really dark. They're almost a black color. And that actually signifies that the beetle that's transforming this pupae is almost ready to come out into a full-fledged adult. So that's really cool. But yeah, this is mostly all pupae just from the giant and the regular mealworms. In order to make sure that I have every size and every life stage of my mealworms at any given point in time, meaning that I always have eggs, I always have tiny babies, I always have medium-sized mealworms, I always have adult large mealworms, I always have pupae coming, and I always have some adults in this cage. In order to make sure that you have that at any given time, you need to age your colony. So you're going to need to get 1 cup of mealworms, let them kind of pupate, do their thing, get a bunch of adults, let them lay their eggs, and then once those adults, you see them starting to die off from age, assuming from age, you're going to want to go to the pet store and get another cup of mealworms, because the ones that you're getting from the pet store, they're all roughly the same age, they're all roughly the same size, so they're all roughly going to pupate and turn into beetles over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. So you're gonna need to get 1 or 2 more cups in order to have a mix of ages in your colony. That way you always have every size of mealworm and always have adults available in the colony at all times. Because if you don't have adults, you're not getting any more eggs, but you're still feeding out those worms to your animals, and you could end up running your colony so low that you have to start from scratch all over again. So you really want to age your colony and get a mix of ages and sizes so you have everything available at any point in time, which will be very handy too then if you suddenly wake up and you have baby tadpoles in your vivarium and you didn't even realize you had a male and female pair in there. So now you have, little tadlets, little baby frogs running all over the place, and guess what? Since you aged your colony and made sure you had a mix of sizes, you'll have little baby mealworms in here that'll be the right size to feed your tadpoles or your tadlets. So that's another upside for it. You are going to want to age your mealworm, your superworm colony as well. It's a little easier to do that just by striating when you force your superworms to pupate. So if you get like a cup of 50 superworms, which is what I did, and separate out half of them to pupate and turn into adults, and then wait like 3 weeks and, make the other half pupate or whatever, they're a lot easier to age just by dictating when you separate them out to get them to pupate to turn into beetles. Mealworms, you don't have that chance, so you just kind of unfortunately got to keep buying mealworms from the pet store until your colony is a good mix of age and size. So I think that's everything. I hope that's everything. Don't forget to dust your mealworms or superworms or beetles, whatever it is you're feeding. Don't forget to dust them with a calcium or vitamin supplement as appropriate for each of your particular animals. You're welcome to experiment with mixing in dry gut-loading food into your substrate mixture. You can experiment with mixing in the vitamin supplements and whatnot, but more than likely, unless you have a ground fine substrate, either a powder dry gut-loading food or a vitamin powder is probably just going to settle to the bottom of the bin and be completely ignored. Might get a little bit of it ingested by the worms, or the beetles might get it stuck on their body a little bit, but you still would need to gut load and or dust the worms or the beetles that you are feeding.